Welcome to the A Minute to Midnight show, folks. And this is Tony coming to you from New Zealand. On with me today, I have from London, England, James Musker. And no, James, you're always very much a favourite when you come on. A lot of people have great things to say about the shows, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion again today on a subject that I said, hey, James, can we discuss this? And a few weeks ago, and you said, sure. So we booked it, and here we are today. So it's great to be chatting, James.
Well, thank you very much for having me on again, Tony. And thanks also for all you're doing at A Minute to Midnight and creating the nurturing YouTube channel, which consistently puts out excellent information. So I just wanted to say what a marvelous job you're doing and how much many of us really appreciate all your hard work. So if you want to donate to A Minute to Midnight, do follow the links.
Yeah, oh, thank you. Yeah, that's a great plug. And yeah, donations are definitely always very much appreciated. They certainly ebb and flow, and it has been a little bit of an ebb at the moment. So thank you for that. Okay, so what are we looking into today, James? What's our subject? I'll let you introduce it.
Yeah, we're going to look at global geopolitical positioning first of all, then Agenda 21, Maurice Strong, and then finish up on climate change and try to relate all these things so that you can gain an even better understanding on what's going on. You know a lot about these subjects anyway, but hopefully you can find out something new, and climate change is quite a tough subject to cover.
Yeah, well, I always learn stuff from you on these things, so I'm looking forward to it.
Well, yeah, thanks. I was recently having a really good discussion with a friend of mine and who's very knowledgeable. She's very knowledgeable on world affairs. And we are talking about how the various blocs are fighting it out on the world stage and how it's America versus Russia versus China and Europe and the rest of the world for global supremacy. And although this is what seemingly seems to be happening on the surface, and this is the mainstream view, I believe that this is not quite what's going on. And you end up getting a lot of difficulties if you're standing with that view in mind, looking at the sort of global machinations. So I believe it's completely contrived and a manufactured event. And it costs lots of money and vast amounts of diplomacy and extra work for the hidden government. But I can tell you that it isn't really America versus China versus Russia and the rest of the world, because they're all in it together at the very top. The tug of war global scenario is manipulated by them. It looks like the countries and political ideologies are battling it out for supremacy. And yes, the countries are semi-autonomous and they do things nationalistically. And so, yes, it can seem to work counter to each other sometimes with what they're doing. But the decisions that really matter at the very top, they're run by the same small, tiny group, and it's all manipulation. So, for example, the cryptocracy, what I call the cryptocracy, the hidden government, outsource the jobs from America to China and move the entire industrial base from the US so that they could create the massive profits which the cryptocracy want. Obviously, there are lower wages in China, less regulations, all of which seems to make greater profits. And as global supply chains are developed, the power of that group seemingly becomes more fragmented. But again, when it really matters, they are all in it together in the same position and they all have the power. The Cold War is another example. Yes, it happened and people were killed and died and all the rest of it. And it cost a lot of money in terms of capital and effort to keep going. But really, it was a contrivance, a piece of theatre designed to create many opportunities for the hidden few to take advantage of.
It's really interesting. Sorry, just to interrupt for a second. You mentioning the move of everything manufacturing that went to China. Now we're really seeing what that means when you have this coronavirus, when all of a sudden manufacturing is without China on full steam ahead. everything starts to break down in terms of what's manufactured. And is the coronavirus a black swan that's happened and caught everyone by surprise, or has it been engineered, genetically engineered or whatever? Well, it's hard to know for sure at the moment, but you can see the results and how they can use it actually to control the economy of the world downwards if they decide to want to through this.
Yes, well, yes, that's a great point to make, Tony, about the coronavirus. I'm not sure, but my position default would be is that it is the hidden government, but we'll find out. So it seems that there are these ideologies, and China getting knocked is part of it, and maybe there's some other agenda that they're going to bring on. Certainly, depopulation is one of their big agendas, and as we know from the Georgia Guidestones and other writings, their intention is to reduce the global population down to only about 500 million people. So yeah, it seems like there are all these trade surpluses, but it's the same extremely powerful group, possibly even as few as 5 people at the top, and they're not really fighting it out. They have their systems that they adhere to, and they've got their subtle manipulations that they're taking us into all the time. So yeah, it makes it look like they want to make it look like there's jockeying for global supremacy going on, the tug of war of history, because if they didn't, then they wouldn't be able to continue to consolidate on their power base. And this is what we see going on today, the Hegelian dialect. By making politicians and trading blocs fight each other, they can continue to reap all the benefits. And this is where Agenda 21 comes in, because the hidden government have told us the economic system they're aiming to take the world into, and that is sustainable development. It was also called by the trilateralists the New International Economic Order. And we know from their writings and Agenda 21 that their attempts are to form a one world government and connect the world up in their massive global supply chain, in which they can maintain and control power long term, not just for their generation and the next generation, but for their families and the generations ahead. So I would say this tug of war concept of all the blocs fighting it out, it's not really going on, because we can see that Agenda 21 is where all the economies and countries are meeting. Every single country has signed up to this Agenda 21 strategy. And, you know, in a way, it's a bit more confirmation that democracy may be dead, because we can't see, there's been no vote on joining into Sustainable Development Agenda 21. So, therefore, we can see that it's them behind it.
Yeah, and of course there's Agenda 2030, which is a kind of continuation of Agenda 21, sort of revamped or modernised or whatever, but it's all the same plan.
Yeah, they've got the further development goals that they're looking for. So Agenda 21 is this massive action plan to inventory and control all the resources, the land, water, minerals, plants, trees, all data, and obviously people as well, and keep them into their economic system of sustainable development. But that's what it is, just what they're calling it. There's another agenda behind it. So sustainable development is the concept that it meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. That's what they call it, our common future. That came from 1987. And of course, the Rio Earth Summit, 1992, you've got George Bush, he signed in America. And for the UK, it was John Major. And so Agenda 21 may seem like a great idea, but it is opposed really to democracy, freedom, and private property and development. and it would not foster, they would argue that it would not foster environmental extremism, world government, and perhaps even totalitarianism. They would say that there's no contextual basis in Agenda 21 for such claims, and that no country would have agreed to Agenda 21 if it said those things. However, we're not as stupid as those bought commentators think. And when you start to drill down into Agenda 21, you can get an unmistakable view that something very wrong is taking place. Once you cut through all the jargon and the endless warm, fuzzy statements that anyone with any sense of right and wrong would agree with, such as ending poverty in all its forms. Of course, we agree with that. Health programs, better management of urban water resources, elimination of unsustainable consumption patterns, etc. All of these things are good. Protection of wildlife, moving away from fossil fuels to more sustainable energy production, etc. But the problem deep within Agenda 21 is that it involves massive state intervention practically across every single level that you can think about, and that we as a populace would have to give away all sorts of rights, which we've spent the last millennia gaining hard-won rights. So we're basically end up being in a position where we're totally open to manipulation. And one example are property rights, where in the global biodiversity assessment, which is the add-on part to Agenda 21, it basically states that they'll be using these usufruct laws to license property and make the land values worthless. So if you're living in a residential area, they might turn it into a city. If you're living in a city, they want to make it into a wilderness. So they'll be able to tell you where to live. And I was thinking this might be really bad news with the outbreak of viruses, because if you're all jam-packed in cities, the illnesses can spread even quicker. So, yeah, we can see.
Yep.
Yeah. The usufruct laws is a Roman concept. It goes back to there where the user or usus of the property is allowed to create a return and enjoy its fructus, but only according to the license which has been granted by the legal owner. And so this is one of the ways in which they can take away land, which is eventually their end goal by the end of this century. So there are some good books out there on this subject. For example, you've got Rosa Corey's book, Behind the Green Mask. And I'm just going to quote, she says, just to conclude this part, that in a nutshell, the plan, Agenda 21, calls for governments to take control of all land use and not leave any of the decision-making in the hands of private property owners. So that's a takeover, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Yeah. And it becomes even more transparent when one looks at the history of it. So we can look at that as well.
Yeah, I think there's been a case recently in New Zealand where someone with a whole bunch of land bordering on a forest, that the land wasn't being used. The state's taken it over and declared it some kind of a heritage zone or something like that. It's like, I'm not sure of the actual details because I've heard that secondhand, but it's like, okay, so that's just how it works, really, even though they've owned the land for a long, long time. The state decides they want to turn it into something. There's not much you can do about it.
Yes, and they will use taxes as well and state licenses to get themselves where they want. Yeah. So up until the sort of mid-60s, the plan of the cryptocracy was to use materialism to grow the world economy and slowly take it over in that manner. But when the Club of Rome, which was founded in 1968, when that started, they were given the job of trying to form the next strategy ahead. And so that Club of Rome is a think tank started in Italy by Aurelio Pecchi in 1968. He was an Italian industrialist. He made Fiat cars. And they wrote several publications, and the one I'm going to quote from now is from the First Global Revolution. Chapter is the vacuum chapter, page 75. And this really is a smoking gun. It's almost impossible to debunk. So they were talking about how they were going to find a way forward for the hidden government. In searching for a common enemy against whom we can unite, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine and the like would fit the bill. In their totality and their interactions, these phenomena do constitute a common threat which must be confronted by everyone together. But in designating these dangers as the enemy, we fall into the trap which we have already warned readers about, namely mistaking symptoms for causes. All these dangers are caused by human intervention in natural processes, and it is only through changed attitudes and behavior that they can be overcome. The real enemy, then, is humanity itself.
Yeah, wow, that's sinister. When was that written?
That 1992, I think, yes. 1991, too, yeah. Before that, you've got the Limits to Growth book, which was 1972, which was another good book to have a look at. So it's almost as if they were thinking of a way in which they could take over the world as part of their final overthrow. And they had discussions about maybe using force and military power, but decided that it was too protracted. And eventually they came up with the plan of the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine and the like. Maybe they hadn't read enough Malthus, because basically a lot of his stuff had been disproven by then. So maybe they should have done that. Part of the march of this story is also that you've got Our Common Future, which was Maurice Strong in 1987. And there we have the testimony of George Hunt, who recorded the high-level meeting where we had Edmund de Rothschild, a statement that he made totally without bias at the Fourth Wilderness Conference, that CO2 is the cause of global warming and that combating it needs money, our money, you and me, our money. He founded from that the World Conservation Bank and also the Global Equity Facility. And the idea was to exchange land for loans. And so I've been doing a lot of research on this World Conservation Bank. There doesn't seem to be a huge amount of information that I can find out about it. But it's just one stepping stone further into the Rio, before the Rio actually happened. Rio happened in 1992. And then, of course, we've got Maurice Strong, who was also at that meeting. And he's heavily involved in the rollout of climate change. They called him the father of climate change. And he made his money through oil. He was an oil man. And he started working in oil at age 19 in Calgary, Alberta. And this is significant because later on, he became a big-time environmentalist. And some people from the left they find this too incredible to believe that someone who was an oil man would eventually start an environmental crusade, and that capitalists who run the socialist movements and push this agenda, that is actually what's happening. So it's a false dialectic anyway, this capitalism versus socialism, because the top industrialists, they control both sides of the debate, the oil men and the environmentalists. So Maurice Strong was head of the United Nations Environmental Agency and contributed heavily to the existence of Agenda 21. And that's really a political agenda which allows the elite really to raise taxes. And we've already discussed Agenda 21. But he rose quickly through the ranks, despite the fact that he had very little experience and absolutely no education regarding anything he presented. And in the end, he got caught taking a bribe and retired to China. And basically, he was running from the law. During the research for our discussion, Tony, I found an interesting Guardian article where there's an interview with Maurice Strong on climate. It's called Bilderberg and Population Control. And one of the things that he mentioned is, in answer to the question whether he's involved in a kind of conspiracy, he says, "I think it exaggerates my influence, my power, and my intention. Anyone who wants to look at the record over the years can see I've been subjected to that kind of criticism, but I've always made it clear that I do not believe that global governance is either necessary or feasible. What I do believe is that we need a system of global governance through which nations can cooperate and deal with issues they cannot deal with alone." Maybe that statement. Yeah. So basically he says, I don't believe in global government, but I believe in global governance. It is a fiasco. Yeah.
Oh, that's a joke, isn't it?
Yeah. He qualifies it a little bit. And this is where the climate change agenda is so incredibly potent, because obviously it's transnational. And it's the only way that they can force us into their economic systems. The New World Order is about economy. I think it's possibly more economic than political.
Interesting too with Maurice Strong. Of course, he was basically a Luciferian and had a New Age centre on his ranch or farm, which was massive. And
yes,
especially with today's how they're trying to get rid of all the cows and everything. It was like, I think he had masses of stock on his masses of land and in his New Age centre.
Yes, it's in Bacca. Yes, he really was up there with links to Lindisfarne, and he was pushing this New World sort of green pantheistic religion concept, because the elite, they understand the subtleties of the human mind and condition. They understand religion, and all the time they're pushing us into materialism, and that's not true, but they know that there's something else, and that's why often these top illuminists do have links into religion. And obviously Maurice Strong is a very good example. He was a new ager.
Yeah, definitely, totally. And of course then it leads us to the Earth Charter.
Yes, this is the more religious side of the Agenda 21, because it's not enough for them to create an economic and political system. They also need to create a religious system. And the Earth Charter is an ethical framework that they have been building up for creating a just, sustainable and peaceful global society in the 21st century. So it seeks to inspire all people with a sense of global interdependence and shared responsibility, that sort of thing. And the whole human family concept, the brotherhood of man, the Gaian, the Earth Mother worship concepts are all something that they're keen to promote. Transhumanism and technocracy. In fact, most of the areas that the hidden government really are interested in can be quickly summarized in only about 5 sort of words. The 5 areas that basically they can that they're interested in is Darwinism, global governance, single economy, depopulation, and technocracy and transhumanism. Those are the main areas that they're pushing all the time through their subtle programming, through films and everything else. So on the one hand, you've got this Agenda 21, which on its surface seems like an environmentalist's dream and a really good idea. Agenda 21 will take away all of the problems of the environment that we've got, or the pollution, and create a global future that really is utopian. But on the other side to this, at the same time, it would mean that a lot of the rights that we have will be taken away, and the hidden government would have all the control and power. And so this, for me, is one of the most important things going on at the moment. Agenda 21. It's not so much Brexit and Trump's impeachment. It's really the slow and imperceptible rollout of the Agenda 21 that we can see. So how are they going to get us there? This is one of the big questions. How can they make Agenda 21 work? And that is through climate change. So
yeah, and boy, we really saw that ramping up in 2019. That's for sure. You know, it really hit the forefront.
Absolutely. We've got lots of academics coming out who are really just crazily pushing the envelope in this. We've got even one saying that we should let the human race become extinct, and the planet would then be fine. Which
he could be the first one to be extinct.
Oh yes, well they live in Cambridge. They're called Patricia McCormack. Yeah. We don't mean to be harmful to her. We just mean to win the argument that this is not acceptable to be putting out true books and academic information that states that humans should be extinct just to save the planet. It's absolutely crazy.
It is.
So I'm just going to give you 4 quick climate change arguments that you can hopefully remember and cover, so that if you do get in a debate with someone, you've got some ammo that you can gently give to anyone that you're discussing this with. And first of all, I think it's important to do that in a nice way. And so number 1 is the percentage of the atmosphere which has carbon dioxide in. It's quite minuscule. They talk about 400 parts per million, which is really a way of saying 0.04%. And that's the percentage of carbon dioxide which is in the atmosphere, which makes it a trace gas. And their argument is that the carbon dioxide has a massive effect upon the amount of the temperature. Because of the sun, it captures the heat because of the amount of carbon dioxide. But their argument is that it only takes 0.1 grams of cyanide to kill an adult, which is only about 0.0001% of the body weight. Compare this with carbon dioxide, which currently makes up 0.04% of the atmosphere. And it's a strong greenhouse gas. Meanwhile, nitrogen makes up 78% of the atmosphere and yet is highly unreactive. The only problem with this argument about cyanide and CO2 is that CO2 is not poisonous. It's a vitally important part of the life cycle and totally harmless. It's not carbon monoxide, which is a poisonous gas. Carbon dioxide is a vital food for plants, and without it, we wouldn't get oxygen, obviously. But it is true that we do need to reduce the amount of coal-fired plants, get our energy from more renewable resources, and 30% of the world's energy does come from coal, and gas-fired would probably be an easy win to reduce carbon dioxide emissions. But just the percentage alone of the greenhouse gases having this massive effect is a spurious thing to start with. Just something to point out. Number 2, science is based on measuring quantifiable data. If the data and scientific theory is correct, it should be possible to predict what's going to happen next with all their climate models, etc. And climate change really is, it's an alarmist thing. They've made huge predictions about sea levels, the Arctic baking, the Sahara conditions that would exist in Paris and Berlin, etc. Climate alarmist predictions have gone spectacularly wrong. And here's a quick recap on some of them you might know about. In January 2006, Al Gore predicted that we had 10 years left before the planet turned into a total frying pan. Well, I'm pleased we made it. In 2008, Al Gore predicted that there is a 75% chance that the entire North Polar ice cap would be completely melted within 5 to 7 years. He'd at least hedged that prediction by giving himself 75% certainty. In 2008, a segment aired on ABC News predicted that New York would be underwater by June 2015. And it goes on. The the first Earth Day, its sponsor warned in 1970, I think it was, that in 25 years, somewhere between 75 and 80% of all the species of living animals will be extinct. And another Earth Day prediction from Kenneth Watt: at the present rate of nitrogen buildup, it's only a matter of time before light will be filtered out of the atmosphere and none of our land will be usable. And Paul Ehrlich said that population will inevitably and completely outstrip whatever small increases in food supplies we make. And the death rate will increase until at least 100 to 200 million people per year will be starving to death during the next 10 years. That was in his book, Ecoscience. And a study from Nature Climate Change reviewed 117 climate predictions and found that 97% of them never materialized. And, it's not acceptable. Additionally, we've got the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, that everyone's talking about. They've gone wrong in their predictions practically every time. Practically every time their models have come out wrong. But instead of acknowledging that, they've just doubled down on their threats. And so we continue to have people basically giving us a hard time about saying that, maybe this isn't really a true conversation that we're having, and that really maybe CO2 is not the driver of global warming.
It reminds me of that, the Japanese climate modeler, Nakamura, I think his last name was, basically, a top one, came out and said climate change models are useless.
Yeah, well,
and that's from one of the guys that would know better than anybody. So,
yeah, Japanese scientists are very precise, and they're people. But this is part of the problem, that the more that they push the climate agenda, the more the accolades and awards and money they get, and their research grants will get signed off and agreed. And so if they can fudge the data here and there, so what they've been doing is in previous years, making it colder so that the graph is steeper because it's warmer. So it makes it look like it's warmer now.
That's insane. I know they've done that in places like in Australia, for example, where they've taken historic records and lowered the temperatures. How they managed to justify that, I don't know. So that then they can make today's ones look like it's heated up. But they've actually changed the actual temperatures that were recorded and said, this was wrong or whatever. And so they alter them. I mean, come on.
Yep.
And as far as that guy, that Nakamura goes, it's great to have somebody that actually is an expert come out and say this is useless and at worst, it could be used to completely falsify everything. But, then someone like that, instead of that being on the mainstream news, it's ignored because it doesn't fit the agenda.
Exactly, Tony. Yeah, it doesn't fit the agenda, so they push it out. So if you've got 10 articles coming out saying that it's happening, then they'll push those. If you've got 10 that don't, they won't give those any coverage because they control the media. Why would they be giving that information out? And they had with this ClimateGate thing, we had these emails that were hacked from the University of East Anglia in November 2009, and they categorically show, in my opinion, without any shadow of doubt, that they were manipulating the data to fit in with their theory and their models. But they would come back, with scientists manipulate data sets to show a trend, and the CRU rejected this, stating that the emails had been taken out of context and merely reflected an honest exchange of ideas. But I would come back with, why are you destroying data then? That's not exchanging honest information. So I think that, their argument can be proven false since they did destroy data. And those scientists who are gently falsifying the information, there's no real incentive for them not to be falsifying the information. So it's like a sort of circle. Incorrect data slightly fudged this way, well, you get more grant. And so it goes on. You get more grant, therefore you can keep going with this, building the climate agenda up and up and up. Whereas those who protest about the climate agenda, saying that it's bad science, would lose their jobs, they wouldn't get any funding, and they'd be ostracized. And, a classic example is Judy Curry, Dr. Judy Curry. She lost her job. She was a brilliant climatologist, and what she had to say was worth listening to. But actually, in the end, she's just been ostracized, and she's not even in academia anymore. So this is what we need to be doing is statement analysis, which is a technique for analyzing the words people use to try to determine what they've said is accurate. The police use it. Critical reasoning skills to find out if what a suspect says rings true. And for climate change, a lot of what is spoken about does not pass the statement analysis check. And some people have that ability to spot untruth. And if you're a believer in the climate story, then I challenge you to get more rigorous with your statement analysis skills and more skeptical with your reading on scientific papers covering climate change, because you will notice that there are all sorts of people who are lying about this for their own ends. And it starts right at the very top with Al Gore. And it's not at the end of the day about science, it's about politics. And so I think,
and of course he's made millions of dollars out of this, out of his books and all his climate change hysteria. He's become richer and richer out of it.
Absolutely. So if we all give him lots of money, it'll be brilliant because the planet won't be polluted and we'll live happily ever after. Sorry, a bit flippant, but you know what I mean? It's, man. Yeah. He doesn't do as he says either, because he has that mansion right on the coast in Montecito in California, I think it is. I think he bought it for a cool 8.8 million US. So he's doing all right. But if you're an Illuminati, money isn't really that much of an issue, is it? So, we need to be careful that we're not being led up the garden path to a conclusion that's not actually our own.
Yeah.
And scientists can be incentivized to support a theory. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're conspirators, but they have an incentive to falsify data gently here and there. And who's going to pick up on it? No one. And this goes back to the fact that the hidden government are good at creating epistemological cartels. There's a mouthful. Epistemology is the study of knowledge. So where's it disseminated from, its origin, who's in control of knowledge, and the elite control knowledge through suppression and selective dissemination of information. And so I've got a quote here from a naval admiral called Chester Ward. He was similar to Barry Goldwater in terms of sort of that era in the 60s and 70s. This is mainly about the US government, but it could equally apply to the UN. Once the ruling members of the CFR have decided that the US government should adopt a particular policy, the very substantial research facilities of the CFR are put to work to develop arguments, intellectual and emotional, to support the new policy and to confound and discredit intellectually and politically any opposition. The CFR has a goal: submergence of US sovereignty and national interdependence into an all-powerful one world government.
Wow.
So that was Chester Ward in his book, Kissinger on the Couch, page 151. He wrote that in 1975. Wow. So, it's just a bit more evidence of what's going on, and that the media is slanting the information, and that people like Judith Curry did lose their job. And it's no surprise with a hidden government to be meddling with universities back from the Invisible College back in the 16th century. After the Invisible College was the Royal Society. That's it. So I think when you look at climate change articles and debate, IPCC graphs, please bear in mind, one, statement analysis, filtering of information, having your intelligence officer's hat on, and two, be aware that the evidence itself may be weighted. So with those things in mind, I think you will be able to understand what's going on. But having said all of that, maybe this argument about climate change we shouldn't even be having at all, because the problem with the climate change argument is that once you've won the argument, you'll lose it again, because that people will say, well, it's good that we're doing something with the environment because we need to stop polluting and we need to move into be less in a rush as capitalism is. So that's you lose the argument again once you've won it. That's what I think anyway. That it's not a good thing to bother to argue this, because at the end of the day it's all political. It's not really about science at all. The scientists have got sort of caught in this car crash, as it were. And I've begun to wonder recently whether there's something else going on, and that is that they're creating the climate anyway.
Yeah, well, that's definitely, people would say that as well, with things like HARP and weather modification and chemtrailing and all that, how they can alter things. It's definitely, well, I think they can definitely locally do that anyway. Even if they can't do it on a whole global scale, they can target areas.
Yes, I was just wondering about that 9/11 energy-directed weapon that put on a satellite in space. It's conspiracy theory, so we don't have much evidence for that. But obviously, we do know from Judy Wood's book that energy-directed weapons were almost certainly used on the World Trade Center towers. So there we go. But I don't want to be too dogmatic on that, but just chucking that out there, that maybe this whole climate change thing is being modified by them and the deep state. They've done it before. They did it in Vietnam, Operation Popeye it was called. Kissinger signed it off, and so it happened. It was to extend the monsoon period so that they could try to win the Vietnam War. But that was simple weather modification, in my opinion, as opposed to what they have now. Very much more powerful energy weapons, etc. At the end of the day, all of this is political. And we've even got people high up stating this. For example, Timothy Worth, president of the UN Foundation, said, even if the theory of global warming is wrong, we will be doing the right thing in terms of economic and environmental policy. That's a daft statement in my book, because it's a false argument. The science might be false, therefore the reasons are false, everything. We've got another one here. Paul Watson of Greenpeace declared, it doesn't matter what is true. It only matters what people believe is true. And so this is why they have to keep banging on, beating on the what I call the environmentalist drum. I mention it in the book. Keep banging on about it. And if people don't agree with them, then they're going to pass laws to outlaw it and make it illegal and fine people and all the rest of it.
Just for a second there, James, can I'm sure most people would know already, but for those that don't, can you just tell them the name of the book that you said the book, but some people may not know which book that is.
Yes, sure. It's called The New World Religion and the Beliefs of the Elite, and it's on Amazon. And it's in paperback and Kindle format. So, please do buy it. It's there, and it covers all sorts of issues like this. It does touch upon climate change. It's a New World Order book, and it goes into the religious aspect of Agenda 21 and the rollout of the sort of green Gaian religion.
And it's definitely a must-have for anybody that studies this kind of stuff, I can tell you. It's a brilliant book. So, I would encourage people to buy it. Okay, carry on, sorry. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, no. I've just got a little bit of a mission for you. If you want to take me up on this slightly left field idea, but you might find of interest, and that is to go and find someone who's quite old, maybe in their 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 100, as old as you can, an old farmer, and have a chat to him about climate. See what he's saying. Ask them if it's got
hotter or colder, or if the weather has changed. I'd be really interested to find, it's not very scientific, I know, but I'll bet you he'll come back saying, no, the weather's actually warmer or colder than it is now. So I would say that he'd just say, it's just different. But I have had that conversation with one or two friends of mine, so old boys, and they're interesting in themselves. So there's a little mission for you to go and do.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, even from my own perspective. I look at it and think it's it's become sort of similar to the 1970s, the climate again, in some ways, the way I look at it. So that's not scientific. That's just thinking, wow, the hot days and the cold ones and all that, those extremes were there then. So
yeah, it's just weather, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't
mean,
really
the climate the climate changes. It has done, for millennia, but it's the sun that drives it, the climate change, and not all these other things. And, that's a whole other argument you could spend ages and ages on. But potentially, things are heading towards even a grand solar minimum where it's going to get colder over the next period of time. And but it's all happened before, and it's not to do with man-made climate change. It's the sun that drives it.
Yes, it is the sun. It's not CO2. So we need to be having this debate, but it's terribly difficult to have because it's become so politicized, because they have to keep on banging on about climate change so that Agenda 21 makes sense. Because if you take away the pillar of climate change, Agenda 21 will fall over. You won't have to have smart meters in your home. You won't need to have the sort of Internet of Things being rolled out. You won't be able to get people off the land into the big cities, as it states, and all the rest of it. So it's very, very important to them to push the climate change agenda as much as possible. And eventually they're going to make a kind of religion out of it as well, taking us into Agenda 21 sustainable development. So that's what it does kind of say there, reading between the lines. But a lot of people seem to still want to fight this agenda. Well, we're fighting the agenda. I don't think this is an argument we can win again. So we'll just see how things pan out. Yeah. So there we go, Tony. Do you want me to mention about Streatham, or shall I leave that?
Yep, go for it.
Yeah, we had this strange event that happened on the 2nd of February 2020 in London, where we had this Muslim so-called jihadist called Sudesh Arman went around and he stabbed 2 people, and then there was a shot fired. They killed him, and he was pretended to be wearing a hoax suicide vest. But I found the dates to be highly suspicious. The 2nd of February 2020 being a 22, and the obviously 2020 being a 22 as well. So that's 44, which is one of the master numbers. But what really kind of scared me a bit is that it was the 33rd day of the year. And since we're in a leap year, there are 366 days. And so that means that there were also 33 days to the end of the year.
333, yeah.
Sorry, 333 days to the end of the year. So, there's not much to indicate really that it was a hoax, but other than this numerology. So,
well, of course, maybe not necessarily a hoax, but a black flag event where it's created. It could have been a programmed operative or anything.
Absolutely, yeah, it does. It's highly suspicious, the dates, and maybe it really is the case that behind it all, these, as I've already mentioned, the elite at the very top, they have a good understanding of the sort of deep mind concept and manipulating us, not through MK Ultra and mind control, but just through films, TV, everything we see. And that's taking us to a very bad place where they will be in control and we will be just like the slaves at the bottom. So we are the farmed, they are the farmers. And when probably AI arrives, they're not going to need that many of us around. So hence depopulation, which is always on their agenda. So we need to see through their social programming techniques and stay close to Christ and keep him in mind, keep praying and go forward, and try not to worry too much about the police state or the coronavirus.
Yeah, well, this is it. We don't really do ourselves any good services when we become panicky or in fear of all these things. It's going to happen, and Jesus did warn us of signs that would occur before his return. And to me, I'm just looking at all the stuff that's going on, and it points so strongly to the fulfillment of Bible prophecy, end days prophecy. How quickly or exactly it'll play out is hard to know. It could happen very quickly, or it could, string out a little bit longer. But boy, I can see it certainly all falling into place very much. So yeah, James, that's a really great and wrap up of a lot of these things. Just let the listeners know your book again and where they can get it.
Sure. Yes, it's called The New World Religion and the Beliefs of the Elite, and it's on Amazon. It's got worldwide coverage pretty much. And please do buy it. I've tried to make it inexpensive. It's about £9.99 pounds. It's about $12-13 US. So do buy it. It covers all of these sorts of areas. It's quite wide reaching, and there are lots of rabbit tunnels that you can go down, just start researching this and that it kind of introduces you to. So I've tried to make it a sort of catch-all book as well. So you'll enjoy that, I think, yeah.
Well, I've got it obviously as a PDF file and also a hard copy of the book, and it's a great reference, fantastic reference. And like you say, there are so many additional things in there that you add as references that could be looked into further, or as much as people want. So it's a real great kind of encyclopedia of the New World Order in many ways. So thank you, James, again. It's just been such a great discussion, and I always thoroughly enjoy the times I have you on the show.
Thank you, Tony. That's really, really kind of you. God bless.
God bless you too. Folks, don't forget to hit the like button on this, and make sure you're subscribed to our YouTube channel and our iTunes channel, and also following our website, aminutemidnight.com. A Minute to Midnight is run 100% by donations, and this is a full-time job for me. It's a lot of work. I do really appreciate it when people support with donations. Could not keep this running without your help. So you can donate at the website aminutemidnight.com, and that would be greatly appreciated. The music used in the shows I've written, played and recorded, and there's some free music to download on the website if you want as well. We have a Facebook group and also a forum which you're welcome to join. That's it for this show. God bless, and God willing, we'll be back in a few days' time with another episode of the A Minute to Midnight show.